Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast. I'm your host, Claire, and this week we interviewed Heather Brown, and Heather has quite the story to tell. Everything from struggling in her marriage to waking up and learning about polygamy to COVID and how that affected her to everything in between. Heather has quite the story to tell, and we're going to tell it here on the Clarity Podcast. So stay tuned for all of this and more on this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast. Everyone has a journey they are walking, and along that road, we are met with potholes, road bumps, rain, storms, and sometimes just fog. But through it all, we're really just looking for one thing: clarity. Clarity so we can walk with confidence in that next step. There's one source I run to for that clarity. In the darkest of nights, Jesus offers me light that shines through even the thickest storms. Welcome to the Clarity Podcast, where we find clarity through the one who saves us all. Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of the Clarity Podcast. I'm your host, Claire, and this week's guest is Heather Brown. Welcome, Heather, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you're so welcome. We're so excited to have you and to hear your story. So let's go ahead and jump right into the questions. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about you, where you're from, how old you are, and a little bit about what you do with your life.
Okay. I live in Sevier County, Utah. I'm 35. I'm married. I have 4 girls, and I homeschool all of them. I've homeschooled them since the beginning. We just have kind of the country life. We have milk cows and chickens and dogs and ducks and a garden, and I don't know. It just is the country life for me.
That's awesome. That's such a choice lifestyle in my opinion. So.
It's made even better that my husband is a flight nurse, and he basically has a retirement schedule. He's home a lot, and it's such a blessing to have that opportunity with such a young family.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's awesome. So go ahead and tell our audience, let's jump into your childhood. Tell us a little bit about your background and what religion you were raised in as a child and what that was like growing up.
Okay. So, I always grew up on a dairy. My dad worked for the church. He was a dairyman. And so our family always moved around with the dairies. So the church was our bread and butter, I guess you could say. In addition to our religion, it was our family culture. It was everything. So we moved I was born in California, and then we went to Idaho, and then we moved to Utah. I spent most of my life in Utah. And so we always grew up outside of a town in kind of the country. Not a whole lot of neighbors ever. And so I felt like we were pretty close as a family. We had siblings to play with. There were 7 of us. And we just spent a lot of time. I guess I don't remember so much when I was younger, but growing up, the older siblings would work outside on the dairy, and me and I was at the end. I was number 6. So we just kind of played together all the time when we were too young to go to friends' houses after school or something like that.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the part that the church played in your life and what that looked like for you when you were a child.
Okay. So the church I say all of this knowing that I have a terrible memory of what actually happened. I don't have a whole lot of memories from my childhood. So looking back as an adult, I've had to try to figure out, just observe my life and why things were the way that they were. So my understanding now, looking back on my childhood, is that God and the church were inseparable to me. The church dictated how we lived our lives. We went to church every Sunday. We tried to do all the things. I was always involved in the activities, primary, young women's. And my parents always had callings. I remember going to the church on Saturday nights to set up chairs with my dad because he was this really efficient person. And the people at the church didn't set up the chairs like he liked them set up. And so he was this really great gospel doctrine teacher, and he loved it, and everybody loved his classes. And so he was always trying to improve the situation. And so we would go on Saturday nights and set up the chairs so that everybody could hear him well and everybody would be able to see. And he just thought that out. And that was one of the times that I remember being able to spend with my dad. But it went as far as like, sometimes I would want to go, have a sleepover with my friends on a weekend or something on Saturday night. And typically the answer was no, because we had to be in our ward on Sunday. It wasn't enough to go to church. You had to be, in your own ward. And so, that's what we did. And I didn't know anything different. I thought that's just what you do. And, I think I remember a couple instances where my parents had like lamented how disobedient their children were because they would look at other people in the community, who seemed to have a better Mormon family, and the kids didn't make so many mistakes, and they really were frustrated that we couldn't get family home evening done every week, or it just seemed like there was always this frustration that there was like a better example than we were being, and my parents wanted that to be the ideal Mormon family, and I think we were, but they didn't. It was just kind of this frustration. So yeah, it was just every part of our lives. That's all I knew.
That's a really interesting topic of conversation surrounding the Mormon church, in that there is this look that we feel like we have to hit. And that when I was growing up, I just remember thinking everyone around me had like this beautiful family. And, I thought I had a beautiful, perfect family too.
Right.
But like, I just thought everybody's life was so perfect and so well plotted out. And then I grew up and I realized that all of those people that I thought were so perfect, they had all the same struggles that we have. Right. And so there is like a look that comes with being part of the LDS organization. And I think those are some of the patterns that we try to break as we're coming out of the LDS organization. What are your thoughts on that?
I do remember there were a couple of times where my siblings did something that it wasn't that they were doing anything bad, but they just made like a mistake, like they damaged property on accident or did something. Because we lived in such a small community, it was so embarrassing for my parents to have this like this thing that happened that drew attention to like a problem. And I don't remember very many specifics, but I just remember this overarching, like my dad was just so frustrated that we would make mistakes and we would do things that was contrary to what he wanted us to do, because he reminded us at least several times that he wasn't like that as a child, and he couldn't understand why we wouldn't just obey and do what we were supposed to.
Yeah, and part of that is probably just part of parenthood.
Yes.
But there's still just this big cultural thing that we want to look a certain way. And then we all realize that life is messy and it's okay.
Right.
Right. So tell me a little bit about the role that Jesus Christ played in your life when you were a child and your understanding of Jesus as a child.
Okay. So this again is like my adult self looking back on childhood. And I just don't remember thinking a whole lot about Jesus. He just, like, I knew about Jesus. I was part of the church. He was in all the stories. We had the scriptures. But I just didn't see him as like a real thing, I guess, like a real person, or this idea that I could really grasp onto. And I remember that we were a follow the prophet household. I remember a lot of time, especially when I was coming into my teenage years, the whole ear piercing thing and the modesty thing and the behaviors that I could choose to do. The standard was we follow the prophet. That's why there was no discussion of like at least I don't remember, a discussion of like the teachings of Jesus. It was the teachings of the prophets. So you can only have one ear piercing. You need to, I can't remember what the manual was then, like for the strength of youth is what it is now, I think. But the modesty standards and the no tattoos and the word of wisdom because the church says so, kind of a thing. And I had this, we lived on the dairy and I was always trying to earn money to have extra, for my clothes or whatever. And so I had this soda machine on the dairy and I had to go to the grocery store to buy all of the sodas when it was on sale so I could fill up the soda machine. And so my mom always had to go with me because I was only like 12 or 13. And she was always so embarrassed that we had to like Coke and whatever other caffeinated sodas were in the cart, just a cart full of caffeinated soda. And I was just like, Mom, why does this bug you so much? This doesn't, like, I'm not drinking it. And she just said, we are to avoid the very appearance of evil. And I was like, oh, like, is it evil to drink Coke? Because it doesn't seem that way, but it kind of, like, it was just this cognitive dissonance thing where it didn't seem like it was that bad because everybody was doing it and I didn't want to do it. And I didn't understand. I don't know. I believed that the prophet said so and the church said so. And so that must be true, but it also wasn't, it didn't make a whole lot of sense on the other hand, but I didn't question it. So I don't ever remember seeking a personal relationship with Jesus. I don't remember studying or having a desire to read the scriptures or understand the stories. I know that prayer was like my parents often talked to us about prayer and we had family prayer and things like that, but I didn't pray on my own. It wasn't connecting for me. It just felt like a checklist item. Like you do it just because that's what you're supposed to do, but I didn't understand why I should pray because Jesus wasn't telling me what to do. The church was telling me what to do and my parents were telling me what to do and that was the proper order of things. And so I just didn't feel this need to connect with him in a personal way, nor did I think it was possible. He was just kind of this like idea in the sky.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your teenage years and the role that the church played in your life when you were a teenager. So tell us about Young Women's and tell us if your relationship with Jesus grew in those years, if you gained any greater understanding, or if it was still just follow the prophet when you were a teenager.
It was absolutely follow the prophet, absolutely follow the church. I was not a bad teenager, but there were things in my life that were totally not in alignment with a person that loves the Lord. I was learning how to, and not necessarily learning from everybody or anybody else, but just the thing that I was picking up was that it was okay to do things in private as long as the life on the outside looked in alignment with the church. So as long as I was taking sacrament on Sunday, as long as I was doing callings, as long as I was in church on Sunday, going to my meetings, that was good enough. If I could go to the temple and do baptisms, then that was good enough. But in private, I was not living up to the standards of somebody who loves the Lord and seeks his will. And so I was still doing all of the things. I was a mime maid. That's the middle one, right?
Yes.
I remember being a mime maid and we had such a small ward. There was, it was just a tiny little town and we didn't have enough people to fill even presidencies for each of the, what do you call them, classes? I want to call them quorums, but they're not quorums. The classes. And so we just had one young women's presidency that would be over the laurels, the mime maids and the beehives. I was a mime maid and they made me the president, even over the older girls. And I can't remember what they said, if it was either said outright or just kind of implied. They said, you're the one that everybody looks to. You're the example. You're the one that is friends with everybody. You're kind. You're coming to all the meetings. You're doing everything right. We need you as an example in the Young Women's program. So, they made me the president and I just felt this weight of like to be a good example, but it wasn't motivation enough for me to, like change where my heart was at. But I was really good at checking all the boxes. I just thought that was good enough. That's how you do it.
Tell us a little bit about your experiences maybe at girls camp and kind of what you experienced in that area of your life.
I always had a lot of fun. Like, I really did enjoy Young Women's. It was a fun program for me. There was a little bit of frustration. I can't remember how old I was. I think it was the second half of my Young Women's time. There was this leader that got put in, and she just always wanted to do crafts every single time. And I was like, I can't with the sewing and the crafting. There has to be more. And, the young men are doing these fun things, but this lady, she keeps thinking that this is all women want to do. And so there was this frustration. I wanted to do more fun things. And thankfully they did. I remember, I don't know if it was church policy or just the ward, but they started implementing more involvement from the young women in the planning of activities and all that stuff. So since I was the president, I got to help plan girls camp and be involved in implementing those things. So I was grateful to have the input on those things. But I always loved girls camp. I think I got to go an extra year more than other people because my birthday was always on girls camp. So I actually got to go when I was 11 for the first time. And then I think I went again when I was 16, but I'd already been 4 times. So I was like a junior later or whatever, but I loved it. It was so fun to be with the girls and to, we had in school like this group and this group and this group, and we didn't really mingle in school, but at girls camp, everybody kind of came together and actually can't remember if I enjoyed that part or not. Like as an adult, I kind of enjoy that idea, thinking that I liked hanging around kids that I didn't really hang around with in school, but I think I did. Like I remember wishing that those girls would, the ones that came to girls camp, I wished that they would come to church and hang out with us more so that we could, fellowship them and know them better. And then another thing that I learned, I don't know that I learned, but it was an experience in Young Women's where they were changing presidencies, and it was this same leader that I had a hard time with the crafting situation. She called some counselors, and all of us were just like, what in the world? Why would that doesn't make any sense. These other women, they were either like inactive or really old, or I can't remember who they were, but I just remember thinking like, we barely even know these women. And the Young Women's president was like, everything in the church is supposed to be done by revelation and everything. And she was like, just so you know, I didn't get any answers for this presidency. I prayed and there were no answers. So I just called these women just for, I thought it would be a good idea, but God didn't tell me to do that, nor did he there was no direction given. We were like, okay,
so it was
a
desperation call, not an inspiration call.
Yes, it felt like that. And the fruits kind of bared that out. Those counselors never came to meetings. They didn't help with anything. I think it was probably a quick turnaround after that. But it was one of those, as a teenager, I was just like, why would you say that? That's weird. Why would you? Because it felt like, at least for me and the other girls, it undermined the whole process and made me feel like, okay, well, they're not here by inspiration, so I don't need to listen to them. Or it was weird. And that always stuck with me, things can happen that are not inspiration in the church.
Yeah. My mom actually got to the point at one point where she would ask the bishop, is this a desperation call or an inspiration call? And I don't think the bishops ever really knew how to respond to that.
I wish that I had learned that, because I know for sure that has happened to me as an adult. There's no other reason except for you just thought this logically made sense.
Yeah.
Or you're desperate.
Yeah, definitely. Or they're just trying to fill a position and they think it's doing something.
Right.
Right. Yep. All right. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about your young adult years and your growth or staying in the same place with your relationship with Christ, and what the church looked like in your life as you were graduating out of teen years and into young single adult years.
Okay. So I had gone kindergarten through 11th grade in the same school. I'd grown up with all the same people. It was a small school, small area. I knew everybody, and we moved away the summer before my senior year, and I was like, this is an absolute nightmare. Like, I can't believe this is happening to me, to a 16-year-old girl. That's just like the worst. And so we had to move away, and I went to this other school. It was so much larger than there were more kids in my class in the new school than there was in my whole high school. In my whole high school that I had moved from. And so I just felt lost and angry and frustrated. I actually don't remember a whole lot from that time, but my mom says that I would come home from school every day and lay on the couch and watch TV. And I don't remember it. I think I was just like so angry and nearly brain dead. Like, I had no friends. I lived way out of town and no job or anything. And so it just felt like my life was over. Before I moved, I had met my husband, now my husband, during that time, or before that time. He left on a mission after I moved, after I had started school and started my senior year. And he'd gone on a mission, and he'd give me a ring, and I'd promised to write him. And, it was the greatest love story. And, and so I was kind of just wanting to clean up my life a little bit, my heart. I wasn't doing terrible things, but I just felt like, okay, at least I should start studying the scriptures and praying on my own. And so I was like, I'll just, give it a shot. I had never prayed about anything of any significance in my life up to that point that I remember. But I was so miserable in the place that I was at, and I wanted to move back home, back to where I had left. And I just wanted to live with a friend and finish out my senior year in my old school. And so I don't remember if my mom told me to go pray about it or if I just did, but I prayed about it. And it was the first sincere prayer that I remember having offered, and I got an answer, and it was so cool. I didn't know that could happen that way. And I was just blown away. And the answer was, in the positive, to move back to my old school. And I went and told my mom. I'm apparently more frustrated about this than I remember. She just kind of rolled her eyes and was like, that's just because that's what you want. Because she didn't want me to move back. I was so confused, disheartened, because it was the first real experience that I'd had with prayer, and it was completely invalidated for me. And so after that, I was like, if that wasn't God, then I don't know how this thing works. And I didn't make this connection now, but later I looking back, I think I realized that this is a pattern of the church, right? The church receives revelation, and you're not allowed to contradict it or to get anything contrary to what they say. And it worked the same in my household. I wasn't allowed to get revelation different than my parents. And so I think I just kind of gave up. Why would I try? If everybody else knows what I'm supposed to do with my life, why would I even try to get answers about what I should do if it's much easier to just do what people tell me is right and, not have any skin in the game? That I feel like that maybe kind of set me back. I still wanted to be worthy of this really cute guy that was out on a mission. And so I still would try to pray and study my scriptures, but it was really for him and not necessarily for me. I think not that he asked me to do that. I wanted to be better for him, not really to get closer to God. I moved out and just did kind of the teenage life. I graduated high school. I moved out on my own and was working, and it was the first time I had any freedom to choose. So I stopped going to church as often, but I lived in a BYU ward in BYU housing. And so my roommates were always going to church, and they were trying to keep me on the straight and narrow. And they were frustrated with some of the, if I would go to a dance a dance that was a UVU dance, not a BYU dance.
Wait, for real? That seems a little bit petty.
If it wasn't like, I don't know that it was like BYU sanctioned, but they were just like, there were two different kinds of dances going on, and I would sometimes go to the ones that were not
BYU sanctioned
church standards. And so I could tell their like disdain for me doing that. And I had some friends at the time, and sometimes I would bring them over to the apartment, and my roommates just hated them. Like, they're a bad influence, and, you know, probably they're wearing a tank top, and I loved my roommates, actually. I really did love them. But it was this weird battle, like, because they're all going to BYU, so they have to live up to the, you know, the honor code, and I did too, unless I wanted to get kicked out. But the gospel never was anything in my heart. It was something that was this outward appearance. And so I don't know, it was always this battle. Like, why do you guys care about this so much? I'm still like going to church, obviously paying my tithing. I'm still wearing, you know, modest clothes, and I can pass a temple recommend interview. Probably not honestly, but I could pass it. And my teenage years, my young adult years, I was not growing closer to the Lord, but I was really growing closer to the church, because I was watching these girls that I was roommates with, and they were living this different kind of life. They came from different families, and they wanted to live that way. It was their choice. It wasn't their families making them. And I was actually kind of inspired by that they would choose to obey their parents, not because they were compelled to, or they felt guilty or ashamed about it. I had this one friend that she's like, I won't get on a motorcycle because my dad said not to. And I was like, what in the world? You're like almost an adult woman, and you're still living by your dad's rules. But she loved her parents so much, and she was so close to them and had such a good relationship, and I didn't understand that. So I wasn't critical of her, and secretly I kind of admired the way that these women were living their lives. And so after I got over a little bit of like rebellion, and just, you know, when you get let out of the cage, you go a little bit crazy. And I did that for a minute, and I really wanted to go back into the safety of the cage. There were some times that I had to go, you know, to the bishop and repent for the things that I'd done and go through all that process. And I learned through that what a difference it made if the repentance was actually in your heart, and if it was not, because I did both. There was a lot of pressure for me to get those things taken care of because people knew about them, and I needed to do the outward appearance thing. But I could tell a difference between that situation and when I did it on my own, because I felt sorry for the way that I was conducting my life. That was a great lesson for me to notice what a change of heart actually was, and how that had the power to change my life, whereas the other one didn't. It actually made the behaviors worse if I was doing it just because, you know, my parents told me to, or because, you know, somebody knew about it, so I had to take care of it. And I mean, take care of it on the outside. That was the only meaningful experience I had in coming closer to God, was noticing that change of heart. But in all other ways, I was just coming closer to the church, and because they were the same in my mind. And I got married at 19, so I didn't have much of an early adulthood without marriage.
I think it's very admirable that you were able to learn at such a young age the importance of true repentance, and the difference between repenting from your heart and making that a process with God, and just repenting so that your outward appearance can stay intact. And so I think that's really neat about your story, that, you know, everything just is so surface, but you were able to learn that lesson, and that God was teaching you, and he was with you at that time. I think that's really neat. So tell us what happened when your missionary came home, and a little bit about the role the church played when you were newly married and starting to have kids.
Okay. So we had met when I was barely 16 and he was 18. I didn't know this till much later, but I guess the first time he saw me, the Spirit told him, "That's your wife." And then he forgot about it, I guess. He says he went home and told his best friend, but he was dating somebody and I was dating somebody, and he just felt no urgency about it. Like, it wasn't like, I need to date her right now. It was just like, that's your wife. And he's like, oh. And then,
he promptly forgot.
and he just didn't take any action on it, which, I think is wisdom. So we didn't actually start, we were friends, but we were always dating somebody else. And we didn't start dating until like 2 weeks before I went on this mission. I don't know. We were both young, and it took me about a year before I was like, I don't even know this guy. Like, it has been a year. I've moved out of my house. I'm 18 years old, experiencing life for the first time without my parents and without my family. And I'm just, I just wanted to go have fun. And I had a ring on my finger. And that's a deterrent at BYU. Nobody's going to be asking a whole lot of questions if that's your situation. And so I just kind of was like, this isn't really making sense. I still like we were still communicating, and I wasn't like upset. It was just this realization of like, I don't know who I am and I don't know who you are. I don't even know what your favorite color is. And just it felt like these basic things were missing. And so I had went and dated other people, and we kind of stopped writing each other. And then near the end of his mission, I went to Russia to teach English for a couple of months, and he was in Argentina. So we were completely on opposite sides of the world. And he got home 2 weeks before me, and he called me, and we were chatting, and like, cause in his mind, I'm his wife. And so there's no question, like, we're going to get married. He told me on the phone that he loved me, and I wouldn't say it back because for some reason I felt like if I told him I loved him, I would die on the way home. And so I was like, I should probably dig into that. I don't know why that was such a fear of like committing to something and then having it taken away from me. And so he picked me up from the airport, and there was no like question in his mind that we were going to be together. And I came home with the intention of like, look, I haven't seen you for 2 years. We dated for 2 weeks before that. We need to date and we need to be friends first, and then we'll talk about dating. And he picked me up from the airport, and we went home. He took me back to my house so I could shower and everything, and say hi to my mom. I hadn't seen her for 4 months. And then I think that night we went down to his parents' house to stay the night. And he kissed me that night, and I was like, what is wrong with you?
Being just friends is really working out.
I don't even like know you. But he was just so confident, like, no, and this is very indicative of his personality. If anybody knows him, he just, when he has something in his mind, there is no question about it. That is just what it is. And he knew we were going to get married. And so that's just what happened. After that, I think we spent one day apart until we got married, like 4 months later. So we got married in the temple. I don't know if this is too much information, but it did help. It was all part of the process of me seeing the church for what it was and what it wasn't, the importance that I had put on the outward appearance and not realizing that the gospel is one of the heart. There's no way by church standards we should have had a temple marriage. Because we were young and in love, and, things happen. And we had gone to the bishop about it, and I think he told us like, well, as long as you do this, this, and this, you can go to the temple. And then the next time we met with him, he's like, actually, I read the handbook, and I shouldn't have told you that. But since I already told you that, then I won't go back on it, and you guys can still have a temple marriage. And I was like, okay, first I'm grateful because we had already sent the invitations out and set the date. That would have been really embarrassing to have to change it like last minute. But then I was really bothered. Like, it shouldn't work that way. If worthiness is actually a thing, it shouldn't depend on what it shouldn't depend on like the bishop keeping his word or, like his opinion, because in my mind still the church was like the thing. I felt like he probably should have stuck with the handbook. If that's what it said, then that's what we should be doing. So anyway, we got married in the temple. There were a couple of times that we, didn't really want to go to church because of the wards we were in. We lived in like really old wards or whatever. And so we weren't very diligent, but still church was the thing. And you had to be active, and you need to go to church on Sundays. Actually, I still remember my mom, when I was newly married, she would call me on Sundays to see if I'd gone to church. And it annoyed me so much. But that was really important to her, that I like keep going to church on Sunday, and because that was the measuring stick.
Yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead and continue your story and continue telling us about basically as you're raising your children and the role that the church played and what that looked like, and if your relationship with Christ got any stronger and things like that.
We started having kids. We'd been married, I think, 2 years before we had our first child. There just was not a whole lot of like brain space for me once I started having children. Everything was survival mode. And I loved being a mom, but we were in like rather desperate financial circumstances, and having babies is hard anyway. And my husband was gone a lot. I lived in like an established family area, and people had kids, but they were mostly older. So I didn't feel like I had a whole lot of support around me. I wasn't making friends that were in my same kind of stages of life. And so everything was very lonely, but I was still trying to stick to what was right in my mind, which was to stay close to the church, to stay active, and to make that a priority. So I did my callings. They called me to things I didn't want to do. It felt overly stressful for me to do these callings with young kids, but I did my best. And every time I had a baby, this was so ingrained in my mind that it became a pride issue. Every time I had a baby, I made sure to be there the next Sunday. And I never took the break that the doctors tell you. Both of my first children were born in October, so it was right in the middle of RSV season. And they always warned me, don't go anywhere for 3 months. Don't take your baby out in public. And I was like, well, I'm going to show you, because I'm a faithful Mormon mom. And my second baby was born on a Saturday, so I didn't go to church on that Sunday. But the next week I was there, and I never skipped church. I took my kids all the time, because I was determined to not give myself an excuse to stay home from church, because I had watched other people, either in my family or my friends, who were relaxed in their church attendance or any of those things. And I didn't want to do that. I was determined that I would be an example of what was right. And so I remember it got even worse after my third child was born, and my husband was gone so much. I think he had started nursing school then, and he was working full time, and he was gone so much. And I had just had my third baby, and my oldest was 4. I was determined that I was not going to let that be an excuse. So I just kind of doubled down on it. I planned everything ahead of time so that I would be able to be there in the pews, like in the front, and have all of my children there dressed and their hair done. And I would be, makeup on, hair done, and I would be in the pews, and I would go to my meetings. So, but it was like totally a pride issue, because I remember just thinking like, I'm going to show everybody that I'm the best, and that this isn't going to get me down. Like, I'm going to be a shining example in this ward. And when people would say stuff like, why are you here? Or like, how do you, make this work? And I was just like, because I can't even remember what it was, but because if you give yourself an excuse, then it's a slippery slope, and eventually you'll just stop coming. If you allow one excuse in or one justification in, then you'll just, go down the road straight to hell and stop coming to church. And so it just kind of consumed me, this like exact obedience thing, and to excel and be the best at this outward appearance thing.
It's very interesting that the exact obedience is about going to church and the outward appearance, and it's not about like having morals and being honest and like the things that Jesus actually teaches in the scriptures. And so that's a very interesting.
Yeah. Well, you can't see those from the outside, so it's hard to measure.
Right. So keep going.
Okay. So, my attitude had not changed much up to that point in my life as far as what the church was and the role that it played. I just was determined that it would be exactness. And the first time that God intervened in my life, I had 2 kids. I was looking at my life and my relationship with my husband, and we weren't happy, but there wasn't anything that we could point to, either of us, that was out of line. Everything on the surface looked great. We weren't fighting. We were, working together with our children, raising our kids. He's a phenomenal partner, like an equal partner in all things. He's always helped me around the house, and he's cared about me, and he was my best friend. And so I didn't understand why we felt like roommates. And I remember there was this particular day that I was just walking around my house thinking about this, and there was no catalyst. There was no fight or disagreement or anything. But I just had this resigned feeling while I was taking care of my kids, and just realized that the thing that kept us together was raising our kids, and we didn't have a whole lot going on in our relationship besides that. And so I had determined in my mind that we were never going to have anything better than that. That was like all that we had. And when the kids got older, we would probably just, divorce as friends, but we would fulfill our role as parents to our kids and try to do what's best for them. But when we got older and the kids were raised, there wouldn't be any need for us to stay together because there just was no depth in the relationship. But I just remember accepting that. I didn't fight it anymore. I didn't feel anything about it except for acceptance. So we went through that day and we bathed the kids and put the kids down to bed. And we were sitting on the couch, and my husband was like super quiet. He's just sitting next to me, but he wouldn't look at me. And I was like, what is going on? He, without looking at me, announced that he had a secret pornography addiction that had overtaken his life. He had determined that day that he was either going to kill himself or tell me about it. I was just in shock. There was no indication of it. I just was blindsided, and I didn't know what to do. We sat there in silence for a long time. I'm a person that I do not want to hurt people with my words. And so I learned as a child to keep my feelings in check and to not just say things because I felt them and process internally. And so I didn't, even though I was having all these emotions, as should be expected, I wasn't saying anything. I didn't want to make any accusations or whatever. So I just stayed silent. And one of us said something about, we need to call the bishop over, because how else do you resolve problems except through a bishop? And it was late at night, and we called the bishop to come over, and he was so great. He gave me such great advice and gave my husband such great advice, but the greatest advice that he gave was, don't talk about it tonight. The feelings are raw. Let it sit for a minute. Just give it a day, and don't talk about it until tomorrow. And maybe some people would not call that good advice, but for me, it was really good advice because I didn't feel any pressure to address it right then. And I could just sit with my feelings and figure out, what do I want to do with this and how do I deal with it?
Tell us a little bit about the feelings that you were having at this time, because I think this is a really important conversation. And it's an important conversation because we live in this world where pornography is just so accepted. And the women, and I know this from my own personal experience and my own personal story, that the women are basically told we're supposed to put up with it and that we're not supposed to have any feelings about it. And so tell us a little bit about your feelings, and then I want you to go into kind of how you guys navigated this and, what your answers were and what answers came.
Yeah. So I guess in that context, I'll tell you the advice the bishop gave me, because it was just so, if I could find him again and give him a hug, I would, because it just was it changed the trajectory for me. And it could have gone so differently. The first thing he said was, he looked me in the eye and said, this has nothing to do with you, right? I was like, no, actually, I don't.
Yeah, no, like the answer is no, absolutely not. Your first thought is, this is all my fault.
Right.
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 And in this particular example, this had happened to my husband when he was a child. He was introduced to it as a 7-year-old at school, and had been a secret problem ever since. So part of my brain was like, yeah, I don't have anything to do with this, but also we've been married for at least 4 years, almost 5 years maybe. And so he made sure, like, that was his number one concern, was my feelings. And he made sure that I at least heard, if not understood, that it had nothing to do with me.
Kudos to that bishop, because like I know women that they have this happen and the husband will not do anything to fix it. And the bishop says things to them like, well, I've never seen a marriage fall apart because of this issue before.
Oh my.
And so those are real things that are happening too. And so kudos to that bishop for helping you to navigate those feelings and seeing that it's not your fault.
Right. Well, and there was a bishop change pretty soon after that. And so we went to talk to the new bishop. And I kid you not, the first thing he said in the meeting was, he looked at my husband and said, are you making sure your needs are met? And I was like, what? That's not okay.
Yeah.
And so I did have, the opposite experience, but this first one, he was amazing. And then I can't remember how it came about, but he was stressing the importance for both of us to keep our communication open and to talk about our feelings and how it's okay to be angry. He was addressing me specifically. It's okay to be angry and hurt, and you need to communicate that. And I looked at him and I started to cry, and I said, is it okay to talk about my feelings? I didn't know that, because in my home, we didn't have any emotional intimacy, and we had terrible communication. And I had picked up from my childhood that it's not okay to talk about your feelings. And so I didn't know that in my marriage, that it actually was okay to be angry and to express feelings. And so he gave me the permission. I remember his look of just like confusion, like just bewilderment, like, of course it's okay to talk about your feelings. Yes, it's okay to talk about your feelings. And I just cried. I was so grateful that he gave me that permission. And it's not like my husband had ever treated me that way. He had been trying to get me to talk about my feelings for a long time, because I'm a pretty shut up person. But for some reason, that like extra person telling me it was okay helped me a lot. So the feelings that I was feeling, they're not uncommon. The betrayal was so like overwhelming, and not just in the action, but in the lying, because I had tried to be honest about everything in my life. And that's how our relationship had started out when we were teenagers. We were honest about, I thought we were honest about things that we had done and things that would potentially, get in the way of our relationship. And so there was just this really deep betrayal in both of those. And then also I was so angry and frustrated, because I knew immediately where the disconnection had come from that we were feeling. We weren't fighting, but we weren't connecting. And this was obviously the reason that we couldn't connect with each other. But for our entire marriage, I had taken that blame on myself. I had said over and over and over to myself and in my journal, it must be something that's wrong with me, because he's amazing. And he, is this worthy priesthood holder, and and he works so hard, and he's so great with the kids, and he has all these just like amazing qualities. He really is an amazing man. And I couldn't reconcile how he could be doing that in private. It didn't make any sense to me. Like, how do you not know? How do I not know that this is going on to somebody that I'm married to? So it was confusing. I was frustrated that he had let me carry all of that negativity and like self-deprecation forever, just feeling like I was to blame for all of our disconnection and all of our problems. And because that was really hard for me to deal with. Actually, before that, I guess I should describe how bad the connection was. Again, there was no fights going on, but the pain of being so disconnected to somebody that you're married to was just overwhelming. And I remember for a long period of time, I would wake up every morning and say, I can stay today. I'll stay today, but I'm leaving tomorrow because I can't handle it anymore. This is not. Something was so wrong. Like my heart knew that something was so wrong, but I couldn't put a finger on it. And it just felt unbearable to even think about staying for one more day. I could only think about the present day, and I could handle that day. So,
and that was before you knew.
That was before I knew.
That was before you knew. So it's very interesting how you can see the problem carrying over in your marriage when you didn't even know what the problem was, but that was the problem, and you could see it even before you knew. That's a very interesting tidbit there too.
Yeah. So all of those feelings were just kind of crashing down on me. And in addition to like, well, what do I do about it? How do you even talk about something like this? I never had that experience, even with friends talking about it or whatever. I was just so blindsided in so many ways and didn't know how to pick up the pieces of my life. It felt like everything had just shattered in a moment. We didn't talk about it that night, and we went to bed, and then my husband worked on an ambulance. He was working 24-hour shifts, so he woke up the next morning or the afternoon or something. He went to work. I think I visited family that day, and I was just a mess all day long trying to figure out, what the heck do I do? How do I fix this, and what do I do? And I didn't want to be angry at him. I don't think I was primarily angry. I was just hurt, and I didn't know what to do with that. So I went home that night, and all I remember was walking into my bedroom, and it felt like I had this halo of light. There was just everything around me immediately was light, almost like I had a headlamp. And I walked into my bedroom, and all of the pain was gone, like in a moment. And it wasn't a voice that I heard, but there was this understanding that the Lord gave me. He said, you've carried this pain for long enough. I'm taking it away. And you can have it back if you want to keep carrying it. But I'm taking it from you. Who wants to carry that kind of pain? So I let him keep it. And it never came back. And that's the first time that I remember God intervening in my life and letting me know he was real. And I didn't know it then because I still had yet to like connect to him as a person. And I've tried to think over my life, why would you give me that gift? There's so many women and men, and there's so many people that are suffering in the world with these kinds of things. And I've seen so many marriages fall apart and couples just not able to come together through this thing. But he gave that gift to me, and it was just the most bizarre experience. And what occurred because of that, pretty soon after that, it dawned on me what my husband had been going through since he was a child, living with this in secret. And because my pain was taken away, and the hurt that had been caused to me was taken away, suddenly I was able to understand what a burden he had been carrying. I can't ever comprehend participating in something that would fill you with so much hopelessness and self-loathing that you would want to take your own life. And that's where he was at. And he had to do it in secret. And I'm not condoning, like any actions or anything. Of course, he made the choice to participate in this, and everybody's accountable for their own actions. But I know that I would not have been able to continue in my marriage unless God had given that gift to me. The thing that was instrumental in my husband being able to recover is that I could lay aside my own feelings about it because God had taken them from me and carried that burden with me or for me so that I could be available for my husband who was not relying on the Lord himself. He was relying on himself to take care of this issue. And so, for the time that was necessary, my husband was able to rely on me because I was able to rely on God. And I didn't know that's what was happening at the time, but that's how I see it now. That we were able to come together and heal through that because God intervened in a way that I couldn't do on my own.
So it sounds like this was a peak in your journey a little bit where you were finally introduced to our all merciful, loving Father who heals us and loves us. So tell us a little bit about how that carried into your life later and what that meant for you, what that meant for your husband. And then later, how that kind of was an introduction to your awakening journey.
So again, still very much involved in the church, and the time that I mentioned after my third child, I was determined to be the best. That happened after this. And so for years I continued to just be, people described it as stalwart. And I went to church on Sunday, did all the things, but I never forgot, obviously, that gift that he'd given me. And there was no way that I could just think he was this weird idea in the sky. Now he was a person. He'd spoken to my heart and acted in my behalf on a personal level. And I didn't know how that was possible, but I also didn't know how to replicate it. I didn't know that I could seek after that, I guess. I tried to get other people to understand that it was possible. And the more and more time that went on, the more I was like, this is a miraculous thing that happened because other people are not getting this same experience. And so I started to wonder I don't know how to say this without sounding like being better than anybody. It just seemed like the Lord was personally invested in our marriage for reasons that I don't understand. I don't know why the same intervention doesn't happen for other people in the exact same scenarios. But for some reason, I knew that the Lord had, there was an invested interest in our staying together and working things out. And because he had given me that gift, I wanted to do everything I could to work with that relationship also. So after that, I was determined and committed to work with my husband, not on a surface level, not in a check the boxes way, but in the heart way, like removing anger and all of the things. I was determined to remove those barriers, and my husband was too, for the most part. We're still human, but we tried really hard to figure out how to love each other through really difficult things. And we kept going along with the church. We kept going through the years, just doing all the normal things. And there was a time where we were getting involved in like some seminar things, and our circle of friends was expanding into people that we never would have met otherwise. A lot of new ideas and a lot of new personalities and things like that we'd never been exposed to before. We started noticing that there were a couple of people that had like kind of strange ideas, and they were drifting away from the church. So we did the typical thing, which is, they're deceived, and maybe you don't get into deep conversations with them because you might get tricked too, and just kind of this judgment thing of like, yeah, they've gone crazy because they're leaving the church. And then we had these really close friends. We still love them. They came to us and told us that they were leaving the church, and I was devastated, completely devastated. But it was the same pattern I had seen, some choices that they were making in their lives. It's kind of like a writing on the wall situation, but I was still devastated that this was happening. And the thing that devastated me the most was my friend, the wife, she used something that I had done as part of her, like a confirmation that what she was doing was right. And we had gone as part of this seminar thing, we had this fancy dinner event. And I don't know why, just like for fun. I had gone to DI and got this dress and it was sleeveless. And I wore it to this thing. So obviously I wasn't wearing garments. I had never taken my garments off before in public, except, for swimming, all the S's. And I felt okay about it for some reason. And so when she was leaving the church, she said she'd gone to the temple and was praying about garments and asking God about garments. And she said he spoke to her mind and said, "It's okay. I know your heart. And so it's okay." So she took her garments off and she's like, it's like when you went to that dance and you said you prayed and God was okay with it. And I was mortified, mortified that I had done something that confirmed this behavior in her. So that like made me double down again, like, okay, I made this one dang mistake and now I'm paying for it. And so is my friend. And so I have to be more exact and more everything. Thankfully, these friends were kind enough to not like shove their reasons in our faces. He kept alluding to something that he had read, and I found out later it was the CES letter, but he wouldn't tell me what it was. Because he's like, I don't want to go around destroying people's testimonies. And I was grateful for that. But the fear also increased because I had seen these people and they left everything. I mean, they said they still believed in God and the Holy Spirit in, their own different ways, but they threw out the Book of Mormon and the Restoration and everything. I remember in talking to my husband about it, I was just like, actually, I don't know if I talked to him about it or if it was just internal dialogue, but I knew that I wasn't strong enough to not be deceived. And so I was like, I can't go near that stuff. I can't ask him what it's about. I can't go looking for it. I'm not even curious about it because I don't know if I'm strong enough to read something that clearly had this effect on them. I just kind of doubled down again with the following the prophet and make sure you stay close to the church and do what they say. And even though you hate going to church, go to church. We moved to the place that we live now. And, I remember. Okay. So we moved to our house in 2019, in the fall of 2019. My husband's a nurse. And so we knew about this COVID thing long before people were talking about it in a real way because they were, preparing for it and things like that. And there was this guy in our ward who is like, he is the town preparedness guy and everybody thinks he's crazy, but he's been preparing for the end of the world for the last 3 decades and knowing that it was imminent, And he got up in sacrament meeting and it was supposed to be a testimony meeting, I think, but he got up and he was like, I'm the ward preparedness specialist and we got this COVID thing coming and this is what it looks like. And everybody needs to stock up on like plastic and duct tape so you can do a quarantine room in your house. And,
plastic and duct tape?
Yeah,
what?
So you can make a sick room.
Okay.
And you need to stock up on, these herbs and these medicines and everybody needs to stop shaking hands. No more hugging. We got a lot of old people in the ward. I think this could be the end and we need to be preparing for this. And I just sat in the back and laughed to myself like, okay, this is getting out of hand. This is going to be just a cold. Okay. Everything's fine. I was starting to be more politically active at some point. That had become important to me. So I was also active politically, and And I just thought, there's no way that this is as big of a deal as people keep making it. But then I just kept seeing everything get worse and worse and worse. And right before everything shut down, I remember I went to Costco, and I don't remember what had happened, but it was just like, it was before they got all the screens and everything, before the actual shutdowns, and they were just trying to like manage space in between people. And I walked through Costco, and they were keeping everybody 6 feet apart. And there was a woman like, okay, you can go here, you can go here, you can go here. And I just sat there and I was like, our world is never going to recover from this. This marks such a huge change. If we don't stop this nonsense, it is not, like, you can't let germaphobes take over the world. It's not good. And it was like, I couldn't comprehend what would actually happen, but I had this idea of like how bad the tyranny was going to get, and the control and the pushing down on people to comply in that moment. And, that's what we saw happen. And I panicked for a little bit because my husband is an emergency nurse. He's a flight nurse. So I knew he was going to come in direct contact with, all of these cases, and the propaganda was just so everywhere. And so I was afraid for a minute, and then I got my bearings and remembered what I had been learning. I think God had always been there in my life. He'd been telling me to homeschool way before I ever understood why. And he was like, everything he was telling me to do, I think it was just like pulling back the curtain on the corruption in all of these systems. So first it was the education system, and then the political government system, and then came the healthcare. So I had been waking up to the corruption of these things. And I know you have to bleep out words, certain words, so
yes.
Try not to use them. But those childhood pokey things that have to happen, that have been a battle in our house for many years, because something in my heart was just like, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. But my husband's a nurse, and he sees, he worked in the ER. And so he saw all these cases. And so we really had this like back and forth kind of a thing, trying to figure out what to do with this situation. And so by the time 2020 rolled around, he'd come over to my understanding and was like, yeah, these aren't good. And we had stopped participating in that particular program. And we had just been so focused on like natural health and stop using medications and things on a regular basis. And so all this stuff was coming about this cold, and all of these, the government was in lockstep with the corruption in the healthcare system that I had already seen was a huge problem. And it just like lit this fire in me to get involved and to start waking people up to what was going on. And so I somehow got involved with the Eric Moutsos group, where he was doing the Utah Revival or something like that. I can't remember, but they were holding rallies all over the state, mostly up in Salt Lake County and Utah County. And I went to every single one of them.
Wow, that's dedication.
I was just like, and I was hauling my kids around too. I had 4.
It's like ultra dedication.
Yes. And one of them was a baby. She was 2 years old. So I was hauling them around the state, going to every protest and every rally that I could think of, spending money at local businesses and trying to do my part to like just tell people what nonsense this was. I was really active on social media, trying to wake people up. And even like in our town, we had, like a book club with my friends, and they were all afraid to go to a restaurant because the governor had just issued this like $10,000 fine if you're found meeting in public, except for business or whatever. And I was like, can you guys stop buying into this? It's all fake. It's all, oh, I was so frustrated and angry. And then the the battle like really came home when my husband was having his job threatened because the company that he works for was amazing because they were a small company, so they didn't have a whole lot of pressure. But right before that, I think sometime in 2020, IHC had bought out his company. And so they were implementing, or maybe that was 2021, I don't know. But his job was now on the line if he didn't take this thing that they were pushing. Well, that was rough. And because I just couldn't, it was like all reason just like went out the door, you know, like I can't lose my job over this. And I was like, you absolutely can lose your job over this. I need a husband and our kids need a father. I had been watching, you know, these things on the news and alternative media and even some friends and have been taking these things and terrible outcomes. It wasn't until we had a friend, a man who was in his probably mid-30s, but has got a young family, and they were friends of ours, and he took it, and he was quite injured from it and like not able to work, and he was, you know, none of the doctors knew anything that was going on. He was in terrible pain, completely incapacitated, couldn't get out of bed, just all these weird symptoms that nobody could explain unless you look at the obvious explanation. And that really affected my husband because he was like, wait a minute. Like it became real to him all of a sudden that it might cost him more than money to take that thing that was being pushed. So it was a really big topic in our house. I wouldn't go anywhere with a mask and never put a mask on my face. And I think we were the only family in our ward that wouldn't do it. And everybody respected that. Nobody said anything about it or pushed back on it, which I was really grateful for. But, you know, every time we'd walk into Walmart, they're like, hey, you have to have a mask on. And I'm like, no, thanks, I don't. And I just was not going to participate. I'm not a fiery person, but during those years, I just was bold and fiery and not going to put up with any of the nonsense anymore.
So how did that leak into the church and into your church life?
So when that letter came out, I can't remember if no, that was the first time when that letter came out saying, you know, we recommend this thing. We urge you. Is that the language?
Yes.
Urge?
Yeah, pretty sure.
Because, you know, the church is still very closely connected to God for me. I was absolutely devastated and confused as heck. I did not know, I could not understand why a man who's supposed to be talking to God, a group of men who's supposed to be talking to God, and a church that is supposed to be defending the truth was giving into this. I knew the things in the letters were a lie, that the government and healthcare leaders did not have good advice in this. But I was confused because I thought, you know, the prophet can't lead you astray. I've known that my entire life. And so that actually wasn't the thing that broke me, because I went in prayer and I said, God, am I wrong? Is it me? Am I the crazy one? And the answer was, it wasn't very strong, but it was just like, just keep doing what you're doing. Everything's fine. I was like, okay, I don't understand, but I will keep going how I'm going. You know, people around me are struggling super hard with the church's response to this. And I just, you know, I was like, everything's fine. It doesn't mean anything. We just need to, you know, they're confused, they're doctors, they're whatever, completely disregarding the fact that, like, if they're taking that stance and it's wrong, it means they're not talking to God about it, which means they're not prophets, or they know it's wrong and they're doing it anyway, which means they're not prophets.
They're really not prophets.
They're really not prophets. And so I was still like riding this line and just, I was even holding like political meetings in my house, trying to gather people to like, fight for freedom and all these things. And at the same time, like, it's fine. It doesn't mean anything about the church. They're just a little confused, or, maybe it's right for some people. And I never fully bought into that, but I was just confused and it just went up on the shelf. And then I think they took the mask requirement away to go to the temples for a time. And the Manti Temple is the temple in my district. And it was the temple I got married in. It was the last like pioneer temple with a live session. And they were about to close it down for renovations. And so I wanted to go back and see. And also I hadn't been for a long time because I'd had a baby and it was hard to get away to go to the temple. And so I wanted to go back and just see what was going on and, pray. And because I still believed that was where you get inspiration and peace. And so because of the social distancing requirements, you had to set up an appointment. So I made an appointment for me and my husband. And a couple of days before the appointment, before we went or were scheduled to go, the church brought back the mask policy. The temple president sent out an email to everybody that had an appointment that said, if you can't or won't wear a mask, please don't bother showing up. And I was just like raging. My shelf was about to break. It was getting so heavy. And I was so upset. And like, I kind of like in a really sassy, angry way, prayed to God and was like, where the heck am I supposed to go to talk to you? And he just calmly replied to me, go to the mountain. And I was like, oh, okay.
No way.
I mean, I could like, and the whole thing makes me laugh because I'm like, there I am praying to God in my bedroom, thinking that I got to go to a building for him to talk to me. And then he answered and, go to the mountain. And obviously it made all the sense in the world. And from then on, my shelf just started to break. I was so angry that I had done nothing wrong. The way that I had conducted myself as a member of the church for my entire adult life was completely on the outside, exactly what they had required. I did everything as best I could. And I was so frustrated that I was being kept out of this place that I wanted to go to. And so I called a friend and, talked to her about it. And somehow in that conversation, I determined to go to the bishop and complain to him about it. I was really nervous because I'm not a confrontational person. And so I didn't want to like cause a fuss, but also, the shelf was breaking and it can take no more. And so I wrote down like all these stats of like how many people are dying and how many people got sick and just all these things to point out the fact that all of these measures and things that the church was participating in are complete nonsense. And so I went and met with the bishop and I told him all these things. And I said, I do not understand how I, as a covenant keeping woman, don't even know what that means. A covenant keeping woman, they can keep me out of the temple when I've done nothing wrong. And he looked at me. I didn't realize that he was on his way out at that time. Like his 5 years were up. So I think he was like, I literally don't care about any of this. Because he was like, yeah, that's too bad. But, it's their building. So I guess they get to do what they want. And I sat there and I was like, their building? Or God's
I thought this
building?
was the house of the Lord. What?
Are you telling me they can just make whatever rules they want and they don't like, that doesn't sound like a revelation thing. That feels like a fear response or a control response. Yeah, that was so frustrating for me. And, but I still don't think I was questioning the church. I still was like, well, they have some weird ideas up there, But that doesn't mean the church isn't true. The church is still true. And, it is what it is. I don't know when it happened, but I remember the moment that my life changed completely. I think God was finally like, I guess I'm going to have to make this a little more clear for you because you're not questioning anything. I was sitting down in my basement and we have a wood burning fireplace in the winter. I just love to sit there and watch the fire and think it puts me in, kind of I don't know what you call that mode, and I was just staring at the fire. And then all of a sudden